In Trito and Graham counties, says I live in Haines, that's just where I reside. So make a carpool out to just north of Cedar Bluff area where our main farm is on that. Look at my background. I started in 1993. Had the opportunity to take on 265 acres that I am a first generation farmer, which is probably different, but my granddad was a school teacher that was a hobby farmer. So he didn't really do a whole lot of intensive farming. You'd go just a couple times a year, throw wheat in it, because that's about what his summer was allowed to do. But my dad did not farm. So then, yeah, that's maybe the first generation. So in 1994, we were doing some no-till with cover crops, with milo, basically. That did work really well. We tried some wheat, very little success doing no-till wheat back in the early 90s. In 1999, we went to a little bit of a no-till or minimum till system on the wheat. Same thing as what you've heard and seen from these other ones. You know, we were trying to figure out a better way. I was tired of bouncing through washouts with the tractors, and you're just like, something's got to be a little bit different to make this work. In 2005, we went full no-till after going to a few conferences, listening to what some other people were doing, decided that this was probably going to be a good switch for our farm. 2008, we introduced some cover crops. I cut that off. I don't have any livestock on my operation. My nephew that was working for me, he was bringing in livestock, so that's where we were doing a little bit of grazing of some stuff that we had in there, but I don't currently own any. And we're right at about 5,000 acres that we're farming today from the 265 that I started with. Nope, I'm going to make it worse, so I won't mess with it. All right, so goals when we started doing these cover crops. I'm kind of going to go back. I know I've done this economics talk, and I kind of got tired of it a little bit. Plus, more economics I talked about the last few years, just more depressed you can get on certain things because it's not been real great, right? So I just switched up to kind of where we started at when we started doing this. So goals when we looked at doing cover crops, wind erosion, you know, exactly what we just saw here, you know, was top of our list what we're doing. Water erosion, I told you, you know, my four-wheel drive tractor was an old Steiger that I bought, and if any of you have driven one of those, the suspension on it was not great, right? So they're pretty rough riding, you know. And so once the hydraulic seat went out, you had an air seat, you thought you had a whole different tractor, you know, with that thing when you had it. But very rough riding. Hard pans, you know, you see that where you got, you know, stuff sealing off, and you weren't getting roots down through. That was some of our issues, and then soil health. So a lot of the problems we had when we were starting out was our seed costs for these cover crops were very expensive. You know, we did a oak pea radish mix that was $70 an acre when I started out. So that was a very deal. Wasn't all, you couldn't just look on the internet, find 5 seed dealers, you know, right around you that you could get cover crops from. They were very limited on where we needed to get them. Crop insurance, this was quite interesting, right? You know, the minute you started reporting these, man, they were like ready to kick you completely out of RMA. They just didn't get into times and understand it. So, which led to a lot of problems of us just not reporting what we were doing to crop insurance or FSA. Having a drill ready to go in March for like when you want to start drilling oats or something like that, that was new for me because normally you pull it in September, suck the weed out of it, park it, and I'm not worried about it again. So the cold temps that we fought, you know, it's hard working in that early March time frame, February time frame. We lost a few stands of cover crops just due we just pushed too quick and then get cold snap and you lose them all. Not knowing what varieties were cold tolerant at the time was issues with that too. Probably one of the bigger ones that we still fight when you're doing cover crops will be herbicide carryover, right? You get too focused on what you're doing, you're not looking long term, you're just looking short term, and then a lot of guys ran Finesse in wheat. Finesse is a great product, but it carries like a 2-year restriction on peas, right? So you won't have any peas for the next 2 years if you put Finesse in your wheat. And then how to incorporate that large scale, the whole farm is what that says on the bottom. So this is kind of what, no cover crop would look like back in 2014 when we were doing this. Here's our bare soil. And, that's just what it was. Back to what Candy was saying, this is, what we were trying to avoid, these fence rows that were blowing shut. This is actually one of my neighbors that, really got big into all no-till, but we just didn't understand that we weren't keeping the ground covered, and he was pushing the system too hard, too high fertility, and they were actually scooping that up, driving it to their silo, dumping it in the silo, and then 8 months later hired newer trucks to come out and try to put it back in your field. What do you think that cost you?
A lot of money.
Even a $70 an acre cover crop probably was cheaper than what that is costing to hire that done. This is one of my fields, still happens. That was actually due to a recently planted CRP field that went into the CRP program, grew up full of nothing but weeds, right? The weeds cut loose, come across our field, and this just started my field blowing, This is what that looked like. That's that fence row I just took a picture of in the background in here. Here's where it's a milo field, that we have in here. So this pictures, it doesn't show it on here, but down in the bottom it'll say it's 2014. You guys know what that is already starting for me in 2014?
Windmill grass.
Windmill grass, right? So we've been fighting this plan on. This is back when I would love to have this scenario now. It's just here and there, right? It hadn't got pissed off enough to go across the whole field. So, first no-till drill. This is what we had. A little 12-footer, heavy-duty dude. Man, that thing would plant. It was good. But hey, Buster, it's hard to find parts for it again. Just kind of the same scenario where we all run into, and better technology was coming. Our air seeder is our primary one now. We have a 1990 CCS with a lot of modifications that we did for no-till and drilling cover crops. We got, some spike closing wheels that we added on. Inside the agitator in here, we put 4-inch long pins to keep the oats from bridging. They agitate a lot better. So that, and if you're running oats in any of these, plenty of talc will help too. If you're doing straight oats, if you do a mix with peas, or you can get some other stuff, that will help it flow through that drill too. Here's typically what we started doing would be we would plant a cover crop back into the milo that was going to shorten the fallow period, right? So we're going to keep a root growing as long as we can throughout that fallow period. So we're just basically putting, we were a milo, wheat, cover crop type rotation here to go back to wheat. And that's what it would look like when the cover crop would first start coming up out of these mixes. So what it looked like at about 2.5 months old, we're getting about knee high. And this was full term. And what's tough is, the sunflowers were just getting going when we were to termination. So we've gone away from some sunflowers in those mixes early on, went to like flax, some a little more cold tolerant seed. Because we're getting ready to go spray this out, and we about hated to see that the
Spraying it on June 1st, I assume.
Well, toward the insurance, yes. So this would be just like what the scenarios we saw here. This is a 40-mile-an-hour windy day. We planted this back into that oat stubble residue that we had from that cover crop. And as a little residue would move, but we weren't blowing. And I couldn't get a good picture in here. I don't know if it's not going to show up real back there. My neighbor's drilling back here, and it's just, you can't see his tractor, right? The dust, and it's rolling. So Michael talked about it a little bit. This is snow catch. This is my neighbor across to the north of me. He's bare. He's not catching that. This is our no-till with a cover crop type scenario. We just have to keep a lot more residue. We learned to go to if you got down milo, the aero conversions help. You're leaving more residue. You're not shaving it off the ground. We went to a stripper head. We try to strip any of the crops that we grow as much as we can. But I caught, blew off of his, and I caught his snow. And then fortunately, I probably caught some of his snert, right? That's a good thing, right? So what you don't realize is what this led to was, this is back in his exact same spot where he blew it, he winter killed, right? So then I turned around and looked at ours. We did not winter kill. We had enough snow protection and all that. So, it's so hard to say how many of these little things just keep adding up on what management decision we're making. So in here, what was interesting, and I've done studies with the wildlife and park, and man, if you ever want to see guys giddy as hell, is go out there and they'll be out there with their nets sweeping around. What do you got? What do I got? Look how much I have, you know. So I did some studies for pheasants to see what kind of food you can create with insects and all this for the wildlife parks. So we were out, that's when this was, and you can see it down here in this corner, there's ladybugs. You get up really close, they're very happy ladybugs. So, you know, that's a good thing. If you're a Milo farmer, why do you want ladybugs? Sugarcane aphids, right? Lacewings and sugarcane aphids, you know, these are great insects to have in here. So I will get into some of the economics of what we saw back when we first started. And I'll let you know, as of today, the word cover to me means a root. And I don't care how you put a root in the ground. It's a root, right? A growing plant is a root. And that's how you fix your soils and fix everything, is having that root. Whether you want to call it a cover crop, you want to call it a grazing crop, you want to call it whatever you want to call it, potentially growing a root is how you keep that system going. So when we were doing this, in this fallow period, we were looking at our cost of seed. We were down to about $18 to $25 an acre. The cost of drilling was $15. The cost to terminate it, remember these numbers are a little bit older. I don't think you can terminate it for 14 now, but was about 14. So we were seeing at this time we had $51 an acre in this cover crop. So where I was at to get rid of kochia, because kochia was my big problem back in this point. It wasn't pigweed or pomegranate yet. So kochia was it. So what do we all do in the spring to eliminate kochia, right? Big old high dollar residual shots, right? Either Banville or we're going to run Corvus, something. So we were up to 14 ounces of Banville. People probably laugh at 14 now. I mean, there's probably guys running 20 ounces of Banville, in the early spring, and Corvus. So that was $21 an acre when you run those. And then I'd spray 2, 3, the fourth operation at 15 to keep that chem fallow clean. I was at $66 an acre in there. So how much were we for that cover crop? 51, right? So there you go. So I can still tell you probably to this day, with the seed cost and all of this, you're going to be right in there. Your thought of putting a cover crop in March and go back to wheat will probably save you quite a little bit of herbicide in that operation. Agree, Tyler? I mean, you've been doing it.
Yeah, totally.
It'll save you quite a little bit of chemical costs. And with these chemical costs rising, I don't think the cover crop's gone up some, but I don't think it's gone up as much as what some of this chemical has gone up. So we are $15 an acre positive. I saw this for many years before I even made a determination to plant a cover crop. I knew I was going to be positive. Kochia that won't die after 4 killing operations. This is what we created, right? We created our own beast of dinging this stuff, and then now we have resistant problems. Right? So I spent $66 an acre to create a problem. So we looked at that rotational cost of the cover crop in the wheat. So if you look at this over a 3-year period, and this is where K-State kind of offsets my math is pretty crazy and funky. But I look at stuff not as what's in front of my nose, as what is it going to take me to grow this crop, is we started looking at what's a 3-year rotation going to look like cost-wise, what's a 5-year rotation going to look like, what can we look at, is this truly going to cost us some different things. So the cost of the seed was $7, $15 for the cost of drilling to terminate, because I thought the cost of the seed, it doesn't just disappear the minute I pull the drill out of the field, right? That residue is still there. So I feel like for the next 2 to 3 years, I am still getting a value out of that seed. So we looked at the $36 an acre versus the $66 that we were at the Kim Valley. So most times you go into the coffee shop, I recommend you never go there, but if you do happen to be the guy that likes to do the coffee shop talk, then I hear it all the time. Cover crops do what? Suck up all your water, right? Takes all your moisture, right? What's it do to your next crop, right? You're gonna
Have a yield drag.
You gotta have a yield drag, right? Just like your weeds grow, it's the same thing, right? It's the same thing as a cover crop, right? So you go around me, I'm saying I'm using the moisture that I'm getting at that time and not letting it go to evaporation, right? So that's what I look at is that, does it hurt my yields? Sometimes it does, it depends. And I can tell you, most of those yield drags that I have are due to my management decisions that I made. Not 100% due to just the government. The one you guys can't see on there, the reason why I don't let my weeds go is my cover crops are a design controlled environment. I'm targeting to try to do something in there to do it. I'll pick on a neighbor of mine that no longer farms. When I was working in the commercial applicator business, he would let his wheat stubble grow and we'd come out with one great big bomb right ahead of planting, right? We'd just smoke it all down and he'd plant his milo in there and he got a beautiful stand every time and, kosher this big. So that got me thinking, okay, why can he get a stand? But we all know what happened to him in June, right? His milo started dying because he ran out of gas. So controlled environment again, that's what we see. So it's way amazing those kosher will suck the water up so that he had moisture. I mean, they're using that water too, just as the milo crop was doing, but yeah, the backside got him. So we did results of just trials, so wheat was really tough for me, when we had cover, no cover, we really weren't seeing any difference in here. But what we noticed is the milo crop following that. That's where we got the bump. And I was too dumb to understand the cycle at that point. I was like, I wanted to see this here. Now my residue is breaking down, I'm getting the cycle moving. That's why we started seeing this milo have a better increase of, 9 bushel, here's a, 15, 18 bushel, increase on that. So at the point I was looking at, okay, so now my wheat's probably more of a sacrifice crop to get me through to planting a cover and getting it in here. So like I said, that cover crop. So that's why in that rotation I break it down. If I'm still getting that bang out of that 2 years later of that residue, that's good. Here's how we did those. I mean, anybody, guys that have yield monitors or did it, there's our check strip, and here's what our yield maps would look like. Mint variety, if you guys can remember planting that variety many, many years ago. This is no fertilizer, no herbicide, no fungicide. We're just trying to see what happens. So what made me look at is, can I replace wheat with just cover crop only? What are our costs that are associated with that wheat crop? It's seed, drilling, chemicals, harvest, crop insurance, hail, fertilizer, land rent payment, whatever you have. So at that time in 2015, we were averaging $205 per acre to get all those inputs put in there. Sorry, you guys can't see that real well. So the wheat cost $205. If I sold 38 bushels in 2015 when we did this, $4.50 a bushel, 171. Oh God, how many years later and we're like the same price, right? Jeez, crazy. So 171 to grow a wheat crop. Okay, so I lost 34 bucks an acre. Anybody feel like that's happened to them? And so the cost of the cover was $36 an acre. So the way I looked at it, they're both about the same wash of what I'm doing in here. You guys have heard me talk on my other talk. The only reason why this $34 loss is good is it makes the banker happy, right? Because I had something to sell at wheat harvest time. So this is what I was talking about. We started looking at these deals. This is 2014 wheat, milo, and then we do a fallow. This is a typical rotation. 2014, didn't have a very good wheat crop, had a good milo crop in 15, and then we had the fallow period. So we look at our cost. Thank God for crop insurance, probably $5 positive on that. $58 we made on a 101 bushel milo crop, and then it cost me the 66 to chem fallow. It was just off. So then what we looked at was, let's see what it costs and I cover. So now I'm 36 less. And then we started doing where we're probably at today and what we like is milo, and then we brought in a cover crop. Made 85. Continuous milo made $138 an acre, then we lost 36 by planting that cover crop. So then we looked at that. That 3-year rotation, I lost $7 an acre in that rotation. Made $27 an acre in here. Most of it's due to the makeup of chemical savings. Now we're talking. Now I can probably pay off something, I mean, this is significant money that I can start looking at. So that was our new test. What are we gonna start looking at? You know, milo cover versus the, you know, milo wheat cover. So $170 or $187 versus 27. This is why I decided not to be a wheat farmer, because I have a $160 an acre advantage not to plant wheat. And I still have residue to plant into. So the reason you saw that guy scooping all of his topsoil back into that truck, he pushed the system to where he did not implement residue back into that system. He just took, and that's what led. So that's where the cover played huge stars. So this one, what we looked at into is, let's see if we can push this system with a continuous living root all the time. Milo in 14, milo in 15, spring of 16, we planted barley, and then I come back in with a cover in here, and that what really would have said a cover crop of 36 in here. But what I did is, I don't know if you guys saw that back by the bathroom, there's a poster board out there that shows some grazing numbers of a grazer that shows what his inputs and his gross revenue of the beef that he took off of that was. And so I just put that number in here. Now you jump from a $7 an acre loss to 432 or 438. If I was you and I was a cattle guy, you know what I'd be doing? Milo, grazing cover crop, and then back to milo or corn. Maybe corn the first year to clean up the shatter cane or all that, and then I wouldn't worry about pushing commodities right now. I'd be grazing beef if I was in the cattle market. And that number right there sure towers over anything else out there, doesn't it, guys? $178 is what he took off of the price. You know, this is today's price, right? So, but yeah, that's what I do. And even if you didn't want to do a summer cover, that'd be a spring cover of oats or something, and try to turn around and follow it back with that. Even if you don't get much growth out of, if you get half the growth out of both of those, you're still probably gonna have enough grazing days to get some pounds of beef on. So yeah, made us look at different rotations, and that's what I'm saying. You need to evaluate your farm and find out what is gonna be the best options for you to go into and find that rotation that works for you. So our goals when we started out, this is what we saw, right? So my goals now, you know, weed suppression became huge at this time. Soil health moved up on the list. We still fight some hard pan issues that we're trying to get fixed, and more residue to feed that livestock, right? We've got to keep as much residue as we can out here to keep our stuff going. Problems when we started going out, you know, we went from $70 an acre down to probably 15 to 25. If you're spending more than 25 an acre, probably reevaluate what you're doing on cover crops. You know, there's certain instances if you're doing a high grazing mix, they could be pushing in the 30s, but try to keep them in the 20, 25. A lot more seed dealers around. Crop insurance still has some fun issues with cover crops, but they came way farther down the line than I ever thought they would. I mean, Candy was with me when I first started out with this, and I got hooked up with some RMA people that asked us questions. We were lobbying for changes. Both of us probably agreed that they weren't going to make changes, were they?
No,
and they did. They made remarkable changes.
Yeah,
RMA.
not until Jimmy got in there, and then we started feeding him.
We still do stands still, you know, when we get cold freezes, and any of you know, you get your oats up this big, it doesn't matter what oats they are. If you get a cold snap on it, it smokes them and feels like you're way behind the eight ball. Start planting your herbicide 2 or 3 years out. Tanya mentioned CSP, EQIP. You know, I've used the wildlife parks. They helped me buy my stripper head, right? And they wanted that residue out there. And what they found out, the residue wasn't what they really wanted. They'd rather pay you to let your weed stubble go to weeds because the weeds probably attracted more insects than. But they had a program, right? So they had money. They're all good programs to get into. Get going. You talk with Tanya, they're all can be designed of how you want them to be on your journey of what you want to do. I would suggest you go sit down with one of those and tell them, you know, your 1 to 10 year goals of what you want, and hopefully they can find programs to help you along that way to get in. This one here, the CSP, it does stand for Can't Stop Paperwork. There's a lot of paperwork with that program. So if you are good with that and you love having 10 binders to turn in every year, go ahead and go for it. But it can be an intense program.
Or come into the office and say, tell me which practices don't require as much paperwork, because I can answer that question.
Right. Getting your landlords to understand, we've had some issues with that, but we got through that, communication's there, it's always high competition for land, and if you're, there's people that were like, hey, your neighbor, your tenant is just letting all this crap grow up to just nothing. And, they're like, no, it's a cover crop. And if I haven't informed them what we were doing, I might have lost some land just due to they thought we were crazy and just letting the fields go to nothing and grow up with weeds, which was what we weren't doing, so. And I think with the other talks you've heard in here, I think there's a give and take to everything you're gonna do in all your management decisions. So if you try to think that you're gonna do one thing, you're gonna be where we are 20 years into this journey, it's not gonna work that fast, right? This is a very slow process. It's not gonna turn over as quick as what you think you want it to. We all have the patience of toddlers, right? We want the silver bullet, the right mix to get us to where we can be, to where we're reducing inputs and all this. So, at this point, I don't know what time I have left, but I was just gonna open it up. I wanna have more of a free discussion where you guys feel the problems in today's ag is, where we can go, what we can do to help it, what your thoughts are. Nobody wants to answer anything, I can start it off. Or questions?
Bunch grass, I call it bunch grass, comes in from back to the road ditches.
Right.
How do you minimize it, how do you, it works its way in, is there any way to?
And this is where I'm gonna say, these are economic evaluations, right? We have thrown so much money and chemical at these that don't stop it, right? So that's not economic, and it's not sustainable, and it's not what I'd say the best virginity practice to use. Minimize disturbance is one of the principles, right? But it doesn't say you cannot go in and have to do emergency tillage. She said this might have to be emergency tillage. If you're new into no-till, you gotta stop that field from blowing. We found that we go and sweep that ground in December and stop those roots growing, we get an 80 to 90% kill of that window grass.
In December?
Yep. So right after Milo's harvest, if you have window grass in there, we would try to go, undercut it. Just try to break up that root system as much as you can to stop it. Because it's a grass, right? It's trying to store all of its energy and everything to go dormant. And then you come back, and I don't care what you've done, we have not been able to do a one tillage pass and it's done with window grass. That stuff will come up so clumpy and nasty that, we've ended up having to do a foul master pass across the top.
Have you tried, I know Skylar's done it before, but leave the pickers up and sweep under it?
I have not.
Like
My problem was I had to pull out a piece of tillage equipment I hadn't used in 20 years. One, I was pissed I had to go buy new tires on it, and the price of tires for a new undercutter, right? Me as an idiot, I did all this, actually, when we were doing we were doing the test, so we had long-term no-till that we were going to do, and we brought out the infiltration machine. We were simulating a 5-tillage summer fallow type operation. And I was stupid, I should have hired a neighbor, it'd been cheaper than me rebuilding an undercutter, put tires on, blades and all this stuff. But yeah, I have not done that. What I would like to do now on this, what we have, is we want to go get it swept and get it done, and now with this moisture, I'm not gonna get it done, so it'll be in the spring. And the minute I get done doing that and get it smoothed out, we're gonna plant oats or rye into it, and then we'll go back to that cover, trying to fix whatever we disturbed, going back to wheat. To your saying, Larry, it sucks. If I could tell you just go and cut the edges of your field before it creeps all the way across, do it. Because if you don't stop it, it just keeps going, right? Because we had quarters that, it started just like this, and then next thing I know, the whole field's covered in windmill grass.
Okay, is it, does the same plant come back, or does it come back from seeds it produces?
I couldn't tell you that. I mean, I'd say 20% of what we did came back from its own roots, and then you still have pressure out there.
So that's why you think, if
Yeah.
do something even in December that it,
Yeah, and so the best thing, I'm gonna be really worried about going back to wheat with this. So the last 2 times I've done this on the fields that we got out of control and we had to work the whole field because of the windmill grass, I planted rye. And then I took the rye to harvest for my seed side of my business. And then we can go 4 years without ever seeing it come back behind the rye. But I've used triticale, I've used wheat, and it doesn't take long for it to start coming back in those scenarios. The rye is still just out competing it, or it's tying up its nutrients that it wants. Something's happening with the rye that we've had way better luck with rye after we've done our tillage in it
Well,
than
it's got
any other
that
crop.
allelopathic.
It has some of that, and I think it just ties up the nutrients too. But it's a mess. It's a problem. I would take kochia and palmer over windmill grass. Because it's just, and I don't care, guys that are full tillage guys, they got it too. I mean, you drive around, you see it, it's everywhere. It's just creeping, it's a creeping mess. Which is us being stupid. What's that ground telling us? It wants to
go
be
back.
wants to go back to grass, right? It wants to go back to what this place was originally before we disturbed it. So, I'll ask you guys a question. How many of you guys, you want to chase the newest fads and try to get on ahead? I mean, whether it's specialty crops, or do you switch to all black Angus because that's what the market wants? Not right now? Do you switch your whole cattle scheme because you try to feed what the market wants right now? Or do you stay steady?
I think that's risky business, chasing a market.
That's us as farmers. That's all we do, right? We
I
chase
feel like
markets,
you
right?
gotta be flexible, but at some point you can't flex so much or overextend it in a way.
Right. How many of you guys grow milo? How many are gonna plant milo next year versus corn? Are the acres gonna stay the same, or are you gonna switch to corn because you think this basis still sucks and there's gonna be a glut of milo around that, you know, will that basis change before July of next year with all the milo that's out in this countryside? Probably not, right? Looking pretty rough. So how many are you frustrated with Trump's tariffs and the Trumpnomics? I am. I'm dang frustrated with it, right? So, whether you want to beat me up in the parking lot afterwards or not. Bankruptcy filings. You know, this is real things. We're going to see our neighbors struggle, and they're going to probably file bankruptcy. This is 2019. You guys can't see it up there, but it says 36 Chapter 12 filings in the state of Kansas. That asterisk beside Kansas means decade high. Okay? This is 2023. This is 10 filings in 2023. You guys have been following any farm journal, what's happening in Louisiana and Arkansas right now, right? They're getting hammered, right? Record losses, record bankruptcy filings. So, politics aside, but we're going to get there. This is Trump's first term, right? We see this pattern, right? So you have a Republican president with a, Republican kind of ran Senate. We suck as farmers. We make no money. So you have, obviously, Biden drops down. You look at this chart, which they don't have it out yet, it's already skyrocketing back up. That is a 77% decrease in bankruptcy filings. And that was tariffs at the beginning of the first go-around, right? Now we're feeling tariffs again. So it's interesting seeing that trend of what's killing us, right? So can't say anything. I don't know which way to vote. It just sucks. I don't want to see anybody struggle and go bankrupt trying to do better. But conservation's getting slammed in these two, funding, and that's just what sucks, Comments, theories, how we change this?
How much is this due to people chasing high yield?
That's a great point.
High yield generally means high input,
Right.
and if you have crop failure, guess what you got? High debt.
So, as us as farmers, I think the only way to fix this and try to get this is we have to have government break monopolies, right? We have 5 monopolies that we fall to as producers, right? So they all lobby for aid, right? How much frickin' aid did we get in those 4 years? A bunch, right? How much did you get in the last 4 years? Not a lot. So, you know, they lobby for that because they see this coming. And so they want that. So it's gonna go back to Bear, it's gonna go back to Coke, it's gonna go back to Case, Deere, Agco, it doesn't matter who it is. Those are your monopolies. And they got us. What can we do about it? Hopefully all of you guys are in here. How many are looking at dropping fertilizer costs because it's just too freaking expensive? Right? So when you do that, what do you think is going to suffer right away? You're going to have a lower yield, right? I mean, you could potentially have it. So if you are going to do that and you don't have your soil biology cranking, I'm going to tell you it'd probably be the best time to go buy a bug in a jug, right? Because if you get that, you skimp, put what you skimp and maybe some of that back into some biology, because it's going to help your system not have that big crash if you try to cut back on inputs.
Back to piggyback on what my dad was saying was more bushels pushing for high yields, high yields, high yields. What does that do to the market?
Right.
It tanks the market because we have this surplus of bushels everywhere.
Right.
If we were shooting for less inputs, maybe a lower yield, but more profit margin, our prices would be better too.
So
because
how
we
many
wouldn't
of
have
you, when
the
you send
surplus.
off a soil sample, say your yield goal is like 20 to 30 bushels above your APH? Raise your hand, I know all of you do. That's what the hell you do, right? My mind, minute you made that decision and you sent that off to go say, I'm gonna cut 70 bushel wheat, when my APH is 35, you just put yourself at risk right along the bat. You're at risk. You're gonna have to have money out of your own pocket that's not covered by your APH if you have crop insurance. So that's, I mean, it's a great point. Yeah, we got so fixed on chasing yield that it was because of the 5 monopolies, right? You know, we gotta do this, we gotta feed the world, we gotta keep pushing more bushels. Even though we can't export them, we can't get rid of them. You know, my biggest thing is like then us as taxpayers having to pay to like a 45Z carbon credit program to guys in Iowa that are gonna run and get these credits that are paid by us as taxpayers. And then I go to Iowa and I wonder why they own a diesel pickup. If ethanol is such a big part of their market, they should have a diesel tax on diesel vehicles. You should be running the product that is making your farm money, right? But they don't. So, but probably the bankruptcies is what scares me the most. I just see people are too overextended. Right now, I think your cattle are bailing out your bad farming side, and it's just barely doing it, even though you got record cattle sales, but it's just barely getting us through this high input farming and very low profit. But yes, I'm, Ryan, to your point, I'm 100% focused on profitability, not yields. I could care less what yields we have, you know. Is it frustrating to drive by and think everybody has a better crop than you do? It does. I mean, if I could sit here and, I mean, if everybody would tell me exactly how much per acre they have in their milo, you know, it's gonna vary a lot, right? But I would say, I met a guy the other day that called me up because they all are just I get probably 5 phone calls a week going, how do we cut back? Because I'm in too deep. And I met one, I told Roger the other day, he was $575 an acre in his milo. Now, I thought, he showed me his numbers and I thought some of them were out of whack. He had $77 for his harvest expense. And I'm like, I just hired a custom cutter at 55. So, I think your number's a little high on there. So, but he broke it a lot down. He had his cost of living, he had insurance expenses, he had, you know, a lot of stuff in there. I get that, you can have that in there. but I just don't see how you could ever, even taking out some stuff, you could still have 400 an acre. So even a 100 bushel crop would not make any money. Yeah. And so now he's to the point, and I'm like, he's like, oh, I want to cut my, he'd been putting on 120 pounds of ends for that milo crop and 40 pounds of phos. And he wanted to cut that down to 40 pounds of nitrogen. I said, you'll kill yourself, don't do it. Wean back slower, but do trials of 40 pounds of nitrogen with no phos and biology, and then cut back to 80 pounds of nitrogen on the rest. Because again, here's my theory too on that, right? When guys talk about yield, I equate it to your debt load. If you need 120 bushel milo, you are farming so far above your means, that's not even fun. But if you're like, I can break even a 70 bushel milo, you're a little more in control of where you're at on your inputs, and you don't have that risk to be out there. But everybody that tells me I have to have bushels, I guarantee you your debt load's outrageous. Time and time again. If you just say, yep, I have to have maximum bushels or we're gonna go broke.
Probably me.
Yeah. Probably, yeah.
Brice, you gonna add livestock back?
I will not, so here's a good question.
You don't have time.
Yeah, I don't have time right now.
You can with that halter system.
So,
That's what I'm thinking.
the question I asked him was me. I'd be the lazy guy that would not go out and look at him, and the tithes would take every calf out there, and I would not have a cow left. But my app says they're good.
They're there.
They're good,
Or if the cows are still there, the cows just aren't.
I mean,
That one moved, oh, that's kind of taking the head off.
yeah, I would not look. I'm that guy. I would not. So I asked him the question. I'm like, that'd be me. No, I probably will not. I looked at, from where we started out at 0.8 organic matter, and we got up as, we're up as in the 2.5s to, maybe 3 in some fields. We plateaued before, with some cover cropping, everything we were doing without livestock integration or much livestock. I kind of hit a plateau. You know what? I made pretty decent money, and I'm doing okay at that plateau. So what really would drive me to go to that next step, to get higher, that's why we went to biology, right? We started really focusing on biology to try to see if I could simulate. I think Michael he'll be light years ahead of me just due to the animal incorporation that he's gonna have. But I also don't have the expense of the cattle. I don't have all this in here that has to factor back into that deal. So I'm kind of happy where I'm at. I don't think I need to bring in, if my nephew was still with me, I think it was benefiting him more than it was benefiting me on that we could have got there, but with him not being with us anymore, I don't have that option.
It still makes sense to plant a cover then and just leave it, let it go. Money.
I'm at the point now, I just want a living root. If I'm gonna plant 6 cash crops in a row, I'm gonna plant 6 cash crops in a row. That'll make me probably more than leaving a cover crop out there economically. I got a field this year that the windmill grass has taken us over. I have a landlord that owns the land, doesn't farm, but owns a cattle, right? So it's a 300-acre field. The minute Milo comes off, cattle are out there. I don't grow anything on the terrace tops or on the edges of the field because they're damaged so far that nothing grows. But, if I say, no, you can't graze it, then I probably won't be farming it, right? So we're going to look at, that one has been 9 years continuous Milo or corn. Had corn in it last year, failed. He grazed it. We planted Milo in it this year, thinking it's going to be probably a disaster again. And we pulled 80 bushel Milo off this. And now I'm like, I was ready to go out and we're going to undercut it and start tearing it up because of the windmill grass. But now I'm like, God, 8 still was okay. Should I push it one more year? So a lot of systems I'll push. I want them to push till you see them break. And what we're seeing, the harder we push them with living roots, not putting more synthetics or anything like that, but just keeping a root growing, they don't break. They just kind of hold at that point. Michael, do you think that's kind of what you've seen on your stuff too? Because you're always constantly having something going and grazing, but you get to the point where, last year, we all were just smoked, and he held on. Yeah, just enough suck moisture and everything. And then we flip-flop this year, and the sad thing is my alcohol bill gets really high every time. And thank God I have people like Michael and Tyler and all this that we will call and try to, you know, talk it through of, God, what am I doing right? You know, I mean, Roger, we talk a lot, you know, what can I do, or what am I doing wrong? What am I doing right? What do you think I should push? Where do I not need to push, you know? And I would say just get caught up to compare yourself to yourself. I mean, we're all big about wanting to compare ourselves to the neighbor. But if you compare yourself to your farm, are you growing? Are you financially getting more stable? That's probably the key to anything. And it doesn't matter if the neighbor does drive by a new tractor, right? Just don't let that bother you. I know it's hard not to, but just don't let it bother you. Because even if your 20-year-old combine's paid for, at least you know it's paid for, you know his name. So.
If they're driving by with a new tractor, I'm saying good luck paying that son of a bitch off.
So right now, I think the next thing is I would not buy a piece of equipment right now. It's gonna tank, right? It's coming. I think you're gonna see dealerships fold before we fold. I think they're gonna tank, you know, they have this whole great system, right? You know, we all are victims of buying something off of Big Iron, right? The dealerships getting rid of. But you know, they can't afford to have that floored on the lot, right? At 9% interest or 10% interest. So what do? They dump it on an auction, right? And what they didn't know is they're just cutting off their own arm by doing that, right? I mean, now they don't have equipment to sell on their lot, or they're so plumb full that they get. How many of you guys get a call every other week from a salesman wanting to quote anything to you? All the time, right? They stop by and like, can I quote anything for you? They're desperate. They are hugely desperate for anything. So yeah, anything else, Roger?
No, we gotta give out some more stuff.
Okay. We can continue this on the farmer panel, I guess, if you guys think of questions that.
That's freaky.
Yeah.